supporting their local community through. In the room next door, I visited a makeshift health clinic where health workers continued to provide essential support to those who need it. And in a very Kiwi kind of a way, I was talking to one of the nurses working there who was telling me about all of the families she had been supporting. And when she stopped, I asked her, "And how are you?" And with a tear in her eye, she told me that she had lost everything. And yet there she was, continuing to work to support those who are most in need, because that's what Kiwis do in times of adversity. And all of those conversations that I have had in recent days have made me so proud to be a New Zealander. Yeah. Because when we are confronted with these kind of events, we rally around and we support each other. And all New Zealanders are rallying behind this cause. People continue to live in a great degree of uncertainty, their lives still disrupted now. The number of people without power has come down sharply. We started with 225,000 households without power. People have been out working in the wind and the rain, day and night, to get people reconnected. And as I came down to the house today, that number has fallen from 225,000 to just around 11,000. We absolutely should acknowledge those who have been putting in the hard yards to get people reconnected to those essential lifelines. More than 1,300 people were still in civil defence centres overnight because they had nowhere else to go. And countless more will be living with friends, family, other extended relatives while they find out what's happened to their homes and what they can do next. The impact on agriculture, horticulture and food production is currently incalculable, but we know it will be significant. As of yesterday afternoon, around 250 state highways and local roads were still closed. Crews were working on 400 kilometres of highways, and of course councils had their crews focused on local roads, cleaning them up and getting them reopened. I want to acknowledge how traumatic this situation has been for so many people and for so many businesses. I think also of the trauma of those who found themselves trapped on roofs overnight. Our rescue teams worked valiantly up until they were no longer able to do so because of the wind, the rain and the dark. And they knew that when they had to stop working, that there were still people on roofs, and they were back out there at first light the next morning to make sure they got those people to a position of safety. But for some people, it was a dark, cold and miserable evening waiting on a roof, and I want to acknowledge the trauma that they have experienced. I also want to acknowledge our extreme gratitude as a country to the brave men and women who have sacrificed so much in the service of their communities. Our first responders, our Defence Force personnel, police, community organisations, local marae, volunteers, and so many more who have contributed to supporting others through this. In this time of great need, your dedication has been an inspiration to all of us. I want to particularly acknowledge Dave Van Zwanenberg and Craig Stevens, volunteer firefighters who were killed in the line of duty while protecting their local community at Muriwai. We ask a lot of our volunteers in New Zealand, but no more so than our volunteer first responders. They put themselves in harm's way to protect all of us, and to their families we say thank you. Thank you so much for the sacrifice that you have made. You are in our thoughts. While the cyclone itself might not have directly affected every New Zealander, there is no doubt that we are all going to feel the effects of it in the coming weeks and months. Northland, Auckland, Waikato, Coromandel, the Bay of Plenty, the Tararuas, Tairāwhiti and the Hawke's Bay account for 30% of New Zealand's landmass, but they're home to more than half of our population and produce about half of our GDP. Therefore, this has been an incredibly significant event for the whole country. And just like with the earthquakes in Christchurch and then Kaikoura, the legacy of that is going to be with us for many years to come. We don't yet have a complete assessment of what the cost of that is going to be, but we know it will be significant. A multi-billion-dollar price tag is ahead of us. And there is no point in sugarcoating it. We know that there are some tough times ahead for us, for the whole country, as we work our way through that. 2023 has the potential to be a very difficult year for many Kiwis, and many of our families and businesses and our communities will be under an enormous amount of pressure. But we will get through this. Kiwis are resourceful and we are determined. And I know that once again we'll tap into our collective strength and our spirit in the weeks and months ahead to come back even stronger. We will do whatever it takes to recover. We started that yesterday in setting out the first steps of our recovery plan. I want to emphasise again that this will be a response driven by local communities. Central government is here to support those local communities to rebuild and to recover. Grant Robertson will be leading that from the central government's perspective as our Cyclone Recovery Minister. He has a proven experience in leading us through challenging times. We will have a lead minister working in each of the regions that have been affected so that we can make sure those local communities and their needs are well connected with our national response. We'll be working closely and guided by the feedback from those on the ground. A task force will be established to ensure that we are bringing together all of the players relevant to the recovery, the insurance companies, the infrastructure providers, central and local government. And I'm very pleased to say that Sir Brian Roche, who has a proven track record of working in both the public and private sectors, has agreed to lend his expertise to that process. A $50 million interim support package was announced yesterday to support businesses and the primary sector and the effect that this has had on them. And we've also put additional funding into the emergency response fund of the Land Transport Fund so that we can continue with that essential roading clean-up work while we scope the true extent of the damage and calculate exactly how much more funding is going to be required. We know that more financial support is going to be required, but the government is in a very strong position to contribute to that. We have some of the lowest debt levels on a per capita basis in the world, helped by the prudent financial management of our Minister of Finance during extraordinary times over the last 5.5 years. We have options and choices ahead of us because of that. Even if we borrow more money in order to contribute to this response, we would still have lower debt than our neighbours and mates over in Australia, and considerably lower than countries like Canada, the US and the UK. We know that how we recover has to be done a little bit differently this time. We've got to build back better, we've got to build back safer, and we've got to build back smarter. New Zealand is now without question experiencing the effects of climate change, and we are well past the point where we should question the impact of human beings on climate change. Extreme weather events are becoming more common and they are of greater intensity. In the year 2021-2022, there was a 9-fold increase in the amount of money required to help farmers and growers affected by floods, storms and drought. We also see the effect on our roads. The number of events requiring emergency works has more than doubled from an average of 67 events per year between 2018 and 2021 to 140 events per year. Even before these recent events, we know that Waka Kotahi was going to need more money just to deal with the emergency response that the extreme weather is causing. Business as usual won't work anymore. We have to accept that billions of dollars of additional investment is going to be required, not just to fix up what has been damaged, but to build more resilience so that we can better cope with these types of events in the future. We cannot fund new roads, though, by cutting the funding for road maintenance. We have to accept that building a more resilient roading network and reducing our carbon emissions are not incompatible goals. Most parts of our society are now also having to grapple with these difficult choices as well. There are challenges in front of businesses, utility companies and other sectors. They are going to need to innovate as we will need to innovate and do things differently. Mr. Speaker, when I became the Prime Minister, I said that we would set a new direction for the government and that we would have our focus squarely on the basics, including the cost of living that is affecting New Zealanders. Recent events have reinforced the importance of that to me, and there is nothing more basic or critical for a government than lifting the country back up after a major disaster. The usual systems and processes of government will need to adapt to the challenge in front of us. We will need to make some tough calls and we will need to prioritise carefully. I've already announced the first round of reprioritisation that we are taking as a government. The Television New Zealand, Radio New Zealand merger won't go ahead. While we acknowledge that there are significant gaps in our social security infrastructure, now is not the time for the social insurance scheme, but we acknowledge that there is still a gap there that we should grapple with. We've stopped the biofuels mandate, and we have asked the Law Commission to look at the issues around hate speech in their totality. I want to provide a reassurance that when we said to the people, the victims of March 15, that we would stand with them and that we would take the recommendations of the Royal Commission seriously, we will not back away from that commitment. But we will also not allow the commitments that we have made to them to be politicised in the way that they have been. We want to make sure that we do this properly and that we address the concerns that the Royal Commission has rightly raised. The scale of the task ahead of us is significant. The worthy will sometimes have to make way for the urgent. We have done that before as a country. We saw governments reprioritise after earthquakes in Christchurch and Kaikoura, and we did that when we responded to the global pandemic. We will do that again. More reprioritisations will follow shortly, but we will still be looking to advance the reform of our water infrastructure. I will say more about that in the coming weeks, but the events of the past month will have focused the minds of many New Zealanders on the need to tackle the challenge ahead of our water infrastructure. It has been tested and it has been found badly wanting. Just patching up ageing pipes and water treatment facilities isn't going to cut it. And abandoning local authorities to deal with the scale of the challenge by themselves is not leadership.
That's right.
We will make sure we get on with the job of ensuring that New Zealanders have the sort of water infrastructure that they should be able to expect as a first world country. The cost of living will be at the forefront of the government's priorities. We know that we are dealing with a heightened period of economic uncertainty. We have already taken action to extend the reductions in fuel tax, saving families filling up the car by up to $17 every time they do that. We've extended the half-price public transport subsidies, and we have lifted the minimum wage because we are not willing to leave the lowest paid New Zealanders behind. In April, New Zealanders will see that our support continues to roll out. Improved access to childcare is long overdue, and New Zealanders will start to see that in the coming months. Improvements to working for families on the Families Tax Credit will also be rolling out. Superannuation and benefit rates will increase, as will the Best Start payment. From the 1st of May, we will deliver the winter energy payment to 1.2 million New Zealanders. But there is no question that the cyclone has changed a lot from a budget perspective, and we will work our way through that. But this is not the time for austerity.
That's right.
It is the time to continue our investment in health and education and in the social services that New Zealanders rely on. And that is where our focus will be. We will continue to invest in dealing with the skills shortages that we have across the country. Because when we have been faced with these sorts of challenges in the past, governments have sometimes retreated from that, and the legacy of that can last for generations. So we will continue to invest in our people, and you'll see that in the apprenticeship schemes, for example, that we have been investing in. 50,000 New Zealanders in work supported by the apprenticeship boost. 215,000 New Zealanders supported through free trades training. We are absolutely committed to plugging the gaps in our workforce, and yes, immigration will continue to play a role there. We're committed to ending the postcode lottery for health in New Zealand, and we will rebuild our mental health system, in some cases building it from the ground up. By the end of this year, more than 3 million New Zealanders will have access to free primary and mental health and addiction support. Community safety will continue to be a priority for us, but we know that empty slogans simply won't cut it. We've got to make decisions based on evidence and resourcing, and we will have, by the middle of this year, 1,800 extra police on the beat compared to when we became the government. Mr. Speaker, right now, the task ahead of New Zealand may seem daunting to many people. There is a big challenge ahead of us all. But the cyclone and its aftermath won't be with us forever. We will need to look through the cycle. We'll be building a country of opportunity and energy where our kids can thrive. We can do these things. We can rebound strongly from the cyclone. We can navigate the global pandemic of inflation. We can invest in the skills, the innovation required to power up for the future. We can build back better. We can build back safer, and we can build back smarter. And we will do that by working together. So let's get cracking.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. I call Christopher Luxon.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that the words after that be deleted and are replaced with, quote, "This House has no confidence in this government, which is known for three things: wasteful spending, an inability to get things done, and for building bureaucracies instead of improving frontline outcomes for New Zealanders." And I have to say, Mr. Speaker, that statement was written for Jacinda Ardern and read by Chris Hipkins. That's what happened there. We got the same laundry list, the same slogans, the same spin that we've seen. But Mr. Speaker, before I come back to that, I rise wanting to acknowledge the huge physical devastation and the emotional toll that this cyclone has taken on New Zealanders. And like many MPs in this House, I've been out and about in those impacted regions, and I'm struck by several things. The first is that we have New Zealanders doing it incredibly tough. When we think about just the families that have been displaced from their homes. I was in an Auckland evacuation centre and I met a fantastic young dad, single dad. His wife had passed away 4 years earlier. He had 2 children, his son was about to go to high school, and his bottom flat that he rented had been completely destroyed with all of their possessions, and yet he was still staying really positive. Just 2 days ago in Gisborne, I met a family of New Zealanders that had just moved here from southern India through Singapore as trained engineers, and the rainwater had come up so quickly that it had flooded their basement, and they were clearly traumatised. But for the actions of a good school principal, connecting them with a local church and finding accommodation for them, but I got the sense they were spending more time in their car with their 6-year-old and their 3-year-old as a result. Mr. Speaker, we've also seen communities that have been doing it incredibly tough, and late last night I talked to Craig Little, the Wairoa Mayor, and he was just talking about some of the challenges of his community being cut off and the suffering and the pain that they've been going through and experiencing. And then a few days ago, I was up in a valley north of Tolaga Bay, and I met a lovely granddad who had not been able to contact his son and daughter-in-law and his 4 grandchildren for over 5 days. And in that last hour, he just re-established phone contact with them, but it will be days before they can actually get in to build and get access into their place and be able to catch up in person. And Mr. Speaker, we think about those that are doing incredibly tough, that have lost their livelihoods. It was a kiwi fruit orchardist who had the kiwi fruit orchard that he'd been building over the last 3 years. It cost $5.5 million to do so, completely destroyed 2 weeks out from taking the first harvest to defray some of those costs, and destroyed by silt and destroyed by slash. And I just say as an aside, I think we need to come together in this House and actually take action with respect to forestry in this country, because it is a great industry and it's something we want to continue to support. But it's the only business, the only sector I know that gets to internalise the benefit and to socialise the cost. And we need to revisit practices, we need to revisit penalties and prosecutions as a result. And Mr. Speaker, we just do think of those families that have lost loved ones, that are going through tremendous shock and grief, readjusting to a life without their loved one in it. And we just thank you for them, we think about them, and our thoughts and our prayers are definitely with them. But Mr. Speaker, over the course of the last week or so, we have also seen the absolute best in New Zealanders as well. And I just think of communities of strangers that in every region have come together to actually go to work and help their fellow Kiwi. I was part of a group of strangers that came together in Sunnynook. We went out in each other's cars, we didn't know anybody, and we were in a stranger's house removing carpet and putting furniture out so it could aerate. I was thinking about the community working bees that were taking place in Sunnynook, but also in Puketapu that we saw just a couple of days ago. And then there have been great donations of food and new clothing that have come from places, as I saw in my own electorate in East Auckland, being sent up to people in Northland. Mr. Speaker, we've also seen the best of New Zealand with respect to the bravery of our first responders and our rescuers. I had a privilege of spending time in Muriwai. That's a really tight community, 1,100 people there, everyone knows everyone. But those two volunteer fire service personnel who gave so much at such short notice and as volunteers stepped up, and I spoke to fire service and St John's people that were with them on that night, and they're incredibly brave. I think about an orchardist out of Napier who had lost a lot of his orchards, almost totally devastated, and yet had used his own personal helicopter to go off and do a lot of rescues. And we should thank him and be grateful for him and that work that he did there. And then, Mr. Speaker, I got to see civil defence staff in local regions, but I also want to say thank you to the Emergency Response Minister for letting me come in and observe what happens in the bunker here centrally in Wellington. All of our civil defence and emergency management people have worked incredibly long hours on a completely complex situation and have done an exceptional job with it. And so we owe them all our deepest gratitude, our deepest thanks and appreciation for everything they're doing. But Mr. Speaker, I tell you those stories because I think in the days and weeks and months ahead, it's really important that we have those stories and those people at the forefront of us and our minds as we actually wrestle with the right response and recovery. It's important that we don't forget them. We don't forget that actually delivering for them, really getting things done for them is what's going to matter here, rather than just platitudes and nice statements. We need to make sure that we can do it right by them. And I think we've seen a great community response, but I'd also say it challenges us to say we need to continually upgrade our emergency management response. We will have sadly more events like this. And I lived in America for a period of time, and I remember watching Katrina, which was handled poorly, and then seeing the subsequent upgrade of each subsequent event across the different states in the US. And I think it's the same for us here. Let's have a great community response, but let's make sure we strengthen our responses as well. So, Mr. Speaker, with respect to the National Party, I mean, there's two roles that we need to play here around this disaster. And the first is that we want to be able to be supportive and constructive and offer constructive solutions. We know that this rebuilding effort is about New Zealand. It's not about politics right now. And right here, right now, our job is to make sure that we are establishing contact with the uncontactable. It's about making sure that we are reaching into those isolated communities, up those valleys and people that have been cut off from communications. And it's restoring that critical infrastructure, power, water, supplies, fuel, communications that they so desperately need. So we need to carry on that work in the coming days. And we also want to be supportive and constructive. We have a playbook from experiences in Christchurch and also in Kaikoura. We've learned lots from those experiences, sadly. And it's important that we actually support the government in making sure that we can action those plans and that recovery in the way that we want to. Things like a targeted short-term wage support for impacted workers and businesses. Things like loosening our immigration settings so we can fast-track the clean-up and the rebuild. Things like making sure the banks actually stand by their customers for the coming years and actually support them. If there's any special legislation that the government feels that is needed that actually enables a faster reconstruction, enables critical infrastructure to get built, we'll be very supportive of that. And obviously anything that gives dedicated leadership to give single points of accountability so that things actually get done and things are well executed is important. So I say to the government, that's what you should expect from us. We will be supportive and we will be constructive on the big set pieces that we need to get done well and done right. And we'll be pragmatic and practical, supportive and constructive around that. But we do have a second role, and that is to hold the government to account for its spending and for its delivery, because it's really important now, more so than ever, that we actually get things done and we actually enable people to get ahead and we get them what they actually need at this point in time. And I have to say to you that we feel some scepticism about that, because we look back at this government over the last 5.5 years and we've seen a very poor record of delivery. What we've seen is some characteristics of this government that are consistent and happen all the time. It wastes a lot of money. It can't deliver anything. It builds centralised bureaucracy and it forgets the front line, and it forgets that it could partner with businesses and communities because it thinks it knows best and that government knows it all and it can do it all here from Wellington. Thank you very much. And I'd just say to the government, that is the complete opposite of what is going to be needed if we're going to get this recovery done and we're going to deliver our services back to our people and actually support the people when they need it. I'd just say to the Labour government, get on with it, get going, get things done, focus on those people. What is it today that we've provided them clarity, specificity, so they can move ahead, they can make the next logical step to dig out of a place of hopelessness to a place of hope is really important. Mr. Speaker, I'd say we know that the rebuild's going to be expensive. We know there was $3 billion spent on Kaikoura. We know there was $15 billion probably spent in Canterbury. We know there was bigger impacts around lives and livelihoods as well. And we've heard estimates of $10 billion with respect to this rebuild and recovery. But it's really important that the government actually compartmentalises and defines that cost. We know and appreciate that we'll need to borrow the money to be able to fund a quality, fast and good recovery. We get that, we understand that. But I have to say our concerns are all about delivery, and it's all about us being quite sceptical from a government that talks about building back better. We've heard those words before. We heard them during COVID. We heard them over the course of this year. It overpromises and it underdelivers. Do you remember we talked about shovel-ready projects? That was a big one. That we're going to move forward now, we're going to build back better, we're going to do shovel-ready projects. Great, fantastic. There's 49 of the 225 projects now completed. That's the reality of the delivery. Remember the government talked about we're going to build Kiwi built houses, 100,000 of them, 1% of them actually built. 1% of them actually built. Light rail was going to be promised to be delivered, so opening up to Mount Roskill by 2021, hasn't even started anything. So it's lovely making bumper stickers and headlines as much as you like, but you've actually got to do the work, get below the surface and deliver outcomes. There's been no major roads started or completed in the last 5.5 years by this government. Not one. Not one. Zero. And so started and completed, not happened in 5.5 years. We had $60 billion spent on the COVID program, and we don't have a legacy of a better healthcare system. We don't have a legacy of better health infrastructure. There's no future legacy for a better improved health workforce. We've got little to show for it. We've spent a tremendous amount of money with little to show for it. So, Mr. Speaker, that is our concern. We will be supportive and constructive. We will hold the government to account. We are deeply sceptical of this government's ability to deliver and get things done. And what I'd say, Mr. Speaker, is I meant it earlier, that was a Prime Minister's statement prepared for Jacinda Ardern but read out by Chris Hipkins. And it just underscores what we've been saying. You can change the leader, but it's the same team delivering the same poor outcomes. That's the reality of this government. And you can dress it up as much as you like, you can appropriate and take as much language and change the language as much as you want, but the reality is this is a government that still can't deliver. And it's pretty rich coming from a new Prime Minister who's been part of the old government for the last 5.5 years, part of the holy trinity of Grant Robertson, Jacinda Ardern and Chris Hipkins, driving the program for the last 5.5 years, who has a coming to Damascus moment and now decides it's all about getting things done in a cost of living crisis. It's quite unbelievable. It's not credible. You can say anything you want to do 10 months out from an election, but there's nothing in the track record or the background that says he can get things done. And you can't just turn the page and say it's all going to be different with some words. You have to demonstrate with actions that you know how to do it and you're going to get it done. It's the same old Labour, it's the same old thing, it's the same poor outcomes, and I tell you now, the New Zealand people need more than a change in leadership in the Labour Party. They actually need a national government that's going to get things done. Because here's the problems, right? The same problems remain. It's still spin over delivery. It's still confusing activity with achievement. It's actually confusing inputs with outcomes, the things that matter most to New Zealanders. It's a government that's addicted to wasteful spending. How do you literally spend $1 billion more each and every week, hire 14,000 more bureaucrats, collect $17,500 more tax per household, and deliver worse outcomes on the economy, on housing, on health, on crime, on infrastructure, on everything? It's a unique and special skill set. And then the ministers are responsible for those outcomes end up getting promoted. I mean, it's the only organisation that you get to fail upwards in. You know, it's a unique skill set. It's a unique and special skill set. And then it's also got the same attitude, and you know, you can defer the jobs tax as much as you like, you can fudge the three waters as much as you like, you can talk about hate speech being deferred, you know, all that kind of stuff. But the reality is we know what your philosophy is. It is to centralise and control everything from Wellington because you believe that you know best. Think about the Polytechnic mergers, unmitigated disaster, 5.5 years in. Think about Three Waters, still a debate, 67 district councils having their assets stolen from them. Health restructure, how's that all going? Not so great. So, Mr. Speaker, we know what the problems are, we know that they exist. And I just want to say, you know, when you look at the bits that matter most to New Zealanders, and the Prime Minister started to talk a lot about doing things that matter most. Well, I can tell you what matters most to New Zealanders is the economy. And what's happening is we have inflation at really high levels in this economy, higher than we've had it for many, many decades. And the reality is, this is a government that said there was no cost of living crisis for most of last year. It's now supposedly a focus. That's not credible. It's just not believable that you can just turn the page, change some words, and everything's okay. Nothing to see here. It's like a bad episode of Men in Black. You know, it's literally that wand where you just neutralise someone's brain and do a mind wipe. It's not going to happen. It just can't happen that way. This is the reality. The problem has been that this government hasn't had a proper underlying economic plan to deal with the underlying causes of inflation. They're not controlling costs. They're not actually controlling government spending at all. We can see that there's no relief coming through to people. The Reserve Bank's not focused, and our immigration settings have actually been too tight. And as a result, that's driven huge amounts of domestic inflation. So, Mr. Speaker, the real wages are declining in this economy for the last 2.5 years. Wages are not keeping up with inflation and everybody is going backwards. Interest rates are rising. And just think about those families that are going to have $600 extra a fortnight in interest payments over the coming year. We've got more Kiwis cycling off their fixed rates. They're going to go from 3% to 6 to 7%, and it's going to cost them a lot each and every fortnight. It only gets tougher from here. There's recession forecasts. We need a plan to grow the economy, invest in education, invest in infrastructure, invest in research, science and development, make sure it's a pro-business environment, and make sure we've got strong international connections to the world. That's what drives fundamental prosperity and productivity into our country. Mr. Speaker, we've got to talk about crime, because that's another area where the language has been tough, lots of talk but very poor action. It's been very soft on crime. Let's get clear on the outcomes. And the outcomes are really clear. Violent crime is up over 20%. Gang membership's up over 56%. We have a ram raid every 15 hours in this country. We do not choose to accept that that is the new normal, that is acceptable by any stretch. Every Kiwi is owed a right to be able to feel safe in their house, their community, or their business. That's really important. And Mr. Speaker, we had a former Minister of Police who was presiding over that fund of $6 million that was supposed to be delivered to businesses in need. 23 of them got help in 8 months. That is startling execution and implementation, just fantastic. So I think it was quite a good decision to probably replace the former Minister of Police, I suspect. Good call. But I do want to talk in my remaining time about education, because there's another place where we've had incredibly poor outcomes. How do you spend $5 billion more, hire 1,400 more bureaucrats, and deliver abysmal, the lowest, poorest attendance rates we've ever seen in this country? 45% of our kids go to school regularly, 55% don't make regular attendance. Almost 100,000 are chronically absent from school. We have anywhere from 8 to 10,000 that have been permanently disenrolled from schools. Just stop and think about that. Is that a first world response and set of outcomes? No, it's not. It's not optional to go to school. It's compulsory that we go to school and get educated. It's really important for our future. So, Mr. Speaker, we've seen that that's the case. And then if you're lucky enough to actually get into the classroom, we've seen slipping standards. Academic achievement is falling relative to other countries. We know that our kids are not where they need to be. They're not at curriculum when they move into high school. And so I think the best thing the Prime Minister has done in a short time in the role was to replace the Minister of Education. And that was something we fully support. We can talk health. Why do Kiwis now, a quarter of Kiwis wait more than 6 hours to see an emergency department? How have we gone from 1,500 people waiting more than 4 months to see a specialist appointment to now we're at 44,000? How do we have 32,000 New Zealanders waiting on a surgery wait list as a result? These are outcomes. That's what I'm saying. Outcomes matter, not just the activity. It's actually about the delivery and about getting things done. We can talk housing, and that's another one. That was promised. That was a big promise. Lots of outcomes promised there, but none delivered. If home ownership's out of reach because the average house price is up another $250,000. If you can't own one, you end up renting one. That's another $150 a week in extra rent that's actually being passed on to tenants. If you can't get to own a house, rent a house, you end up actually having to go on a state house wait list. That's up 4 times. And if you can't get a state house wait list, you're in emergency accommodation. And that's 4,000 families waking up in emergency accommodation. It's up 4 times. People living in their car. That's not great. So, Mr. Speaker, what I say to you is that, we get it. We want to be supportive and constructive around the recovery. Let's frame what that investment needs to be. We'll support that. We'll be constructive where we can be about that. But we have grave concerns. We are deeply, deeply sceptical about this government and its lack of ability to deliver. So I want us to realise that New Zealand is without doubt the best country on planet Earth. I can tell you, having done this job now for 2 years, and as I go around it, we have the best people, we have talented people, we have world-class talent, we have endless potential in this country. But the reality is that we are not realising that potential at the moment. We are not delivering the outcomes. We are not solving the problems that actually this government said that it would solve. It's not getting outcomes. It's not solving things. It's not helping us realise our potential. And I know that this government, the risk is it's going to make it much harder to get this recovery done. It's going to make it much harder. So please don't make it harder than it needs to be for the New Zealand people. I do genuinely hope that you get to manage this rebuild and that you actually help people who are desperate, because they need confidence and they need certainty and they need clarity and they need to be able to get things done. But I can tell you right now, if this Labour government won't do it, the national government will pick it up in October, and we're very proud. We'll get elected and we'll go get this job done, because that's really important to the New Zealand people. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I call the Honourable James Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, before I begin, I would also like to acknowledge on behalf of the Green Party the fact that over the course of the last month, tens of thousands of New Zealanders have lost their livelihoods, have lost their homes, and in many cases have actually lost their lives. Tens of thousands of people have at some point experienced a level of homelessness and displacement. They've been without power, they've been without the ability to communicate with their loved ones, to communicate whether they are safe or not. And our emergency services and our civil defence responders and so on have risen to the challenge as best they are able, but this has been a catastrophic series of events in Aotearoa. And there has been enormous heartbreak for many thousands and tens of thousands of New Zealanders over the last several weeks. Our top priority right now has to be on ensuring that everybody has everything that they need to be able